Hi, how are you? It's nice to be back in our meeting room, that's for sure. So, anyways, our presenter, Deborah Costine, will share the history of the Garfield House. It's an impressive restoration. I want to say Deborah's formal background is in the fine arts. She has a degree from Plymouth State University, and she studied at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. She's had a 45-year career in puppetry. She has presented to educate students. She's done programs for students as well as schools. She's presented at the Museum of Fine Arts and the World Trade Center, and she became a recipient of the highest award of puppetry in North America. And she often dealt with ecological subjects. So anyways, her life changed quickly. She had been the vice president of Southborough's Open Land Foundation, and in June 2014, sort of took an abrupt change in her interests, and when the unique property known then as the Garfield House was about to be demolished, Debbie and several other preservation-minded people formed the Friends of the Garfield House. In April of 2016, the town of Southborough had a preservation restriction and moved forward with the restoration of this unique property. After researching the project, Deborah created visual presentations. She was invited to present to the annual Preservation in Massachusetts meeting, and she continues to promote this magnificent property in her lectures. So let me present Deborah Costine.
Thank you. It sounds like there's a microphone on this podium, but there's not. It's your voice.
That's good or bad.
So, where should I stand? Okay. I brought my just in case. So I'm Deborah Costine. You've heard my basic story. I want to add one other thing to the very, very beginning. I grew up in northern New Hampshire, in the town of Lancaster, and at two different times, my parents were both presidents of the local historical society. And for the town bicentennial, they were putting together a book called Historical Sites and Houses of Lancaster, New Hampshire. So I was perhaps about maybe 12 years old at the time, and all the galley proofs, whatever, were spread out constantly over the dining room table, and there was a house, this amazing Victorian house called the Van Dyke House. This guy Van Dyke was a lumber baron up in the hinterlands, and the house was amazing. And I said, "Where is that house? I want to see it." And they said, "Oh, well, it's gone." I said, "What?" And they said it was torn down. And I said, "Why? How could they do that?" And that was where a grocery store was built. It was called Food Town. And I have never forgotten about the impact that losing such a wonderful house that was right on Main Street, huge, incredible Victorian. So now, fast forward many years, and here I was mostly performing school assembly programs around New England, when, and I was also on the Southborough Open Land Foundation, still am, Open Land Foundation, and all the boards in town were notified when this developer was applying for an A&R, approval not required, for demolition of that house. So we can, as soon as you're ready to, you're working on that for the last hour. I know. Yeah. So this is the house, and okay, so now when I did this presentation, I created it for we want to back it up. Oh, thank you. You did.
I just made sure I was on track.
Okay, thank you. Preservation Massachusetts wanted me to put all my text on the screen, so I thought I'll just leave it there and read most of it and then fill in a bit. So in the summer of 2014, it was learned that the Garfield House, as it was then known, a 165-year-old, 3-story stone mansion on 5.7 acres of land near the center of town, was suddenly slated for demolition. Mr. John Deli Priscoli, the brand new owner, was in the process of selling it to a developer who was going before the planning board to describe the process of how the house would get demolished. And he said, and if any of you would like to go and collect a stone from the house, you're more than welcome to do so. And I'm thinking, the developer, as the soon-to-be owner, would be free to do whatever he wanted. Southborough at that time, I'm in Southborough, was in the process of trying to get the demolition delay bylaw passed to give a group time to save a house from demolition. So I was at that meeting and was horrified and disgusted that such a unique property, this is only like a glimpse, there are more pictures that show it in its full extent. So he was going to develop the property, and this historic presence on Main Street would be gone forever. And I couldn't stand it. And so that's where I became Mrs. Crazy Person. And I spent, because it got dragged out, 2 years researching, presenting, going down, we all know how this happens, going down rabbit holes to get more information, because I thought people need to know who lived in that house and what did they do. Because as we know, the more people know about a unique property, the more they're going to care about it. If they care about it, they're more likely to want to vote to save it. Okay, next slide. I lit my whistle. So, this was amazing. This was fabulous. And what happened, the next thing that happened, almost the very next day after that planning board meeting, it started, you can go to the next slide, these kids, 2 girls, Bridget and Jen, decided that they were going to start a protest. And this is where I say it almost didn't necessarily even happen, because the mother and father of these 2 girls could have said, "You're going to protest on Main Street?" "Oh, no, you're not." But the parents didn't say that. So the girls, Bridget and Jen, got on Instagram, made little posters with magic markers that nobody could read, and with their tremendous enthusiasm, every day more kids showed up and more kids showed up. And I created, because they were running out to cars to try to tell them what's going on. And no, it's not a car wash. It's we're trying to save this house from demolition. So I created what I refer to as the daily update, so they could hand that out to people in cars and others. And then people brought them snacks, water, even ice cream. And I said every day more kids showed up. The local cable station came, then the Metro West News came, the Boston Globe came, and then WBZ TV. The girls were interviewed. The WBZ truck parked in the developer's driveway. The sale and the demolition were suddenly off. Because they didn't, that was too much for them. They didn't want to have that happening. And I thought, I mean, I love that that's how it started, because, you know, you always hear these kids today, they want everything done for them, but it depends on which ones you know. And if I had gone out there and protested with some of my friends, it would not have had much impact. I would have been sincere, but, so, yes, so now, the house was saved. For now. Next. So what happens next? Now, the real work began preparing to support whatever came next. Okay, so the house is not going to be demolished. Now what? As you all can imagine. What do we do now? So the owner, John Deli Priscoli, who we began to call JDP, because it's a lot easier, he started meeting with representatives of the town, the select board, and so on. And we started just trying to get information, learn as much as we could. That's my main thing, was doing a lot of research about the Burnett family. Now, one thing that happened, and my good friend Al Bazanson, Northboro native, is sitting right there. He and I were kind of partners in crime. His hearing is not the best, so he's wearing a mask and he's in the third row. Al Bazanson, there we go. We were partners in crime. Al came up with so many fascinating ideas. We could do this, and we did everything. So one of the things we did was find out what people think. What were people, what did they think about this idea? And of course, the naysayers will have their say. And I was at the dump, and this guy handing out brochures, and this guy said, there is nothing historic about that house. And I said, really? At that point, I really didn't know very much about it. But I thought, how can that be? It's got so much going for it. At that point, I only knew one thing when all this started. I only knew one thing about that house. And that was, it was called the Garfield House. That's all I knew. And it's 2 years I just became the go-to person because I couldn't stop reading about the family. Okay. So here is a nice view of the house. This is from a different vantage point. You can see it looks much more substantial than it did in that other picture. The first picture you saw was the view from Main Street. This is on the other side. The house was built on the edge of what was then called Stony Brook. And it was built first originally in 1850, and then in 1860, after the Burnett family fortune really expanded, and so did the family, it was greatly expanded. The first part of the house was really a little bit like just right here. And then he built this whole wing, plus the tower, which is gone. No one, I couldn't find out what happened to the tower. Okay. So here's another view of it from Main Street, as it looked at perhaps around 1900. The tower is still there. And one thing I want to point out is right here is a veranda, and these wonderful architectural features that added so much to the appeal of the property. Okay. Another building on the property is the Carriage House. These most of these photos, I was so fortunate to get so many amazing photos because all of this was happening when the Sudbury Reservoir was being built. So it was all going to be dammed up, and so they had to photograph very officially gorgeous, you know, the 6 by 8 glass negatives or something like that, that are just incredible resolution. So because the house is on the reservoir, all these photos were taken of practically every square foot of the property around 1894-95. And what a treasure trove to find so many photos. Back here, you can see a little bit of Deerfoot Farm in the background. That's on the other side of the reservoir. And back here on the other side right here is a glimpse of the stone shop that you'll be seeing in a minute. The reservoir was going to be for the drinking water for Boston. They couldn't have the cows going back and forth through there and the drainage from the farm. So the farm had to be completely demolished and moved down Deerfoot Road. Okay. The summer house, as it was called, sat overlooking Stony Brook until the construction of the reservoir, and it was moved nearby. Okay. Here's another view of the stone shop, much better view, and this is Deerfoot Road as it was in the 1890s. Okay, go ahead. So, here they are. This is Joseph and Josephine Burnett. Who lived in that house and what did they do? So we can go to the next slide. For one thing they did was they had 12 children. And one of them died in infancy. And Joseph, and when I was doing these presentations, I could easily just rattle off who everybody was. But they were quite a family. It took, they needed to have a much larger house, and so then you think, well, where did the fortune come from? What's the story behind them? So let's go to the next slide. Vanilla extract. So Joseph grew up on a small farm in Southborough. His father was a farmer and a rope maker, and he gained an education in Worcester at the Worcester College of Pharmaceuticals. So he became a pharmacist, and one day, and this was another major turning point in the whole story of this house, a woman came into the pharmacy in Boston, where it was, and asked if he would possibly, if he could produce vanilla extract. And he said, well, I'm paraphrasing. It's really not what I do. I'm a pharmacist and I don't do cooking things. But this is another really good thing. He started thinking about it. He changed his mind and decided to give it a try. And that is what changed everything for him, the family fortune. It really took off. Everybody wanted it, and then he left the pharmacy industry and just started creating more flavors. I think Burnett's Flavorings was a thing. That was the main. If you were baking anything, you would have Burnett's vanilla in your house. Joseph was descended from the first settlers, raised on a small farm. He was the founder of St. Mark's Prep School in Southborough. And he supported his two cousins, Eliza and Harriet, in founding the Fay School. Eliza married a Fay, and so Joseph was behind the founding of both schools. He donated the land and provided much financial support for the library. And then he also built a very prosperous Deerfoot farm, which employed at one time half of the town. And he also imported the first Jersey cows to this country. So when you think about it, he did all of this, and yet back when we were trying to save the house, nobody, almost nobody, had ever heard of Joseph Burnett. And I thought, it could have even been called Burnetteville, considering the impact that this man had on the town. Okay. So this is another view of the very extensive Deerfoot farm. The reservoir would be down the hill on this side. Okay? So, I had way too much fun discovering all the connections with this family. For example, Edward Burnett, Edward was the oldest son. He married Mabel, the daughter of the poet James Russell Lowell. And he visited often. That same son, Edward, so he was born on a farm. He was educated at Harvard. And so he had the farm background and rubbing shoulders, elbows with the right people. He was involved in politics a little bit in the Cleveland administration, but then he left all that to begin designing the farms for the estates of the Gilded Age, including the well-known Biltmore estate in Asheville, North Carolina. And he, you know, at that time, these estates, they would have guests come for a week or two, a lot of guests. And so the farm, they needed a farm for milk and chickens and eggs and pigs and vegetables. So they needed a well-designed, nice-looking farm. And so that is what Edward Burnett became also known for. FDR's cousin, I was amazed at this little tidbit. FDR's cousin, Lyman Delano, married Lila, Joseph's granddaughter. Who would have thought? Now, also Edward, the oldest, was among the very first breeders of the Boston Terrier. So I heard that there were lots of Boston Terriers running around that property. Burnett's daughter Esther married George Peabody Gardner, the nephew and financial manager of Isabella Stewart Gardner. So undoubtedly, she came out to visit, and Joseph was determined that every one of his children had at least a summer home within sight of their house. And so the house that Esther Burnett, that was one of the only houses that was pre-existing. They renovated, and it's a nice old house in Southborough, still there. And one other one that I just want to mention, daughter Ruth horrified her family when she converted from Episcopalian to Roman Catholic. And her brother Waldo, who was by that time a vicar in the Episcopal Church, pretty much disowned her. He wouldn't have anything to do with her. But she didn't just she became a nun, and then she became a mother superior, and then she became the first president of Manhattanville College in New York. So they just didn't know when to stop doing things. Okay, next slide. So, backing up again, negotiations began. The owner of the house, JDP, was now meeting with the town to determine the best path to saving the house. There were many options being considered. It was, you know, the proverbial moving target. It was, well, the town could buy it, or maybe St. Mark's would buy it, because they could have it as housing for the families coming to visit the students at St. Mark's. Southborough doesn't have a hotel or motel. A group of us formed the Friends of the Garfield House to be ready to help and support in whatever way we could. And it came down to education, education, education. Okay. Eventually, after quite a few months, the owner decided he wanted to restore the house to its former glory. So he had bought the house thinking they would live in it, but he also is the owner of Edaville Railroad. And he decided that it was going to be too far to drive back and forth. So then he decided, okay, he's going to sell it. But that didn't go well, as you know. So he decided to restore the house only if the town would vote to purchase a preservation restriction. The Friends group, we worked with the Town Historical Commission, the Community Preservation Committee, the Massachusetts Historic Preservation, and Preservation Massachusetts to try to find the best route, how to do it. I knew nothing of any of this. But then, that means you have to convince the voters of the town to spend the money of CPA funds to pay for the preservation restriction. And that was going to be perhaps the main problem. Because, next slide. Comments in the town blog continue to show us a clear lack of understanding among the readers and the problems that were caused when people didn't have enough correct information. If people clearly understood the facts, how a PR preservation restriction worked, and how the CPA worked, they generally would support saving the house using the CPA funds. So again, the town blog was a good source to find out what people were thinking. Why should we give our money to a wealthy man? Why should the town give money to a private citizen to fix his house so he can buy draperies for his house? And first of all, to fix up that house, you have to be a wealthy person. It goes without saying. People said we should use that money in other ways, like all-day kindergarten, or a recreation center that everyone can use, or burying the town utility lines on Main Street, or a new senior center. But those of you who are familiar with preservation, the PR system, you can't, there are three things that you can spend that money on. You can spend it on historic preservation, accessible housing, and land preservation. And the money that was needed had already accumulated and was sitting in a bucket. Not literally. But there was money in each of those three categories. So the money was there, but people said, I'm not giving my money to a rich man. Why not save a factory worker's house? Well, those are good too, but none of them were slated for immediate demolition. So, it was the most helpful thing for me was to find out what people were thinking and then get a very clear, total clear understanding of how to respond. And usually I was familiar enough that I could say, I'm so glad you asked that question. And then I would give the answer and they would say, oh, okay, oh, all right, I didn't understand that. Okay, next. So, getting creative. Get the word out, educate people, keep after it. You see, one thing with saving the Burnett House, like the clock was ticking. We were very much aware of, we had a very limited time to convince enough people in town to first show up to vote and to, of course, vote to save the house. My friend Al Bazanson there, he pretty much camped out at the dump and would talk to everybody. I went there, but I wasn't there as much as he was. And then we did Vanilla Day. I think that was probably Al's idea too. And then I got to meet quite a few of Burnett descendants. And one of them was a jazz musician who offered to come and play, have a little concert as a fundraiser for Jazz for Joseph. And actually, I don't think it was a fundraiser, it was just more awareness building. I created a PowerPoint program, not this one, but who are these people and what all did they do? And all that they did to contribute to the town. And I created also the Burnett Legacy Walking Tour, so that all the places that they had quite an impact on, I would go with the old pictures from the 1890s in a folder to show, here we are, we're standing in the spot where that photo was taken. And people were so enthusiastic. St. Mark's School did provide us with a brochure. They didn't want to buy the house. That's our friend Al. So the house is over there, and the other side of the reservoir channel was all dense growth. And so on the other side, anybody walking on the trail over there, you couldn't see the house at all. So he spent a lot of time keeping it open and clear so that, like when I gave my walking tours, they could look at the scene and see a whole lot more along that way. And make sure that all the people who were ready to support and saving the house would go to town meeting to vote. And you know, that's often just what it's all about. You keep after, you get enough people to go to support it. And Al made several of these, and I'm the recipient of one of them. These were these beautiful photos. He apologizes that the color has faded a bit, but stunning photos to help just catch people's eye and realize that's really quite a house. We shouldn't tear that house down. 2016, the town voted overwhelmingly to purchase the preservation restriction on the Burnett Garfield House. And again, the owner was a wealthy man ready to put money into all of the preservation, all the restoration that was needed. So we really had a lot on our side with this. So I felt there were like 11 elements that made this work. The protest that I described, And then using the resources of Preservation Massachusetts, the Community Preservation Committee, the internet. We had the Facebook page, we had a website, and the girls created a petition on change.org. We created our friends group, lots of historic research, the brochure, and so important, maybe the most important, was being ready to deflect the damaging misinformation. Regularly checking the town blog to see what new thing people were thinking of that were just not accurate. Lawn signs went up, all the outreach things, and then the passion and obsession. That the picture of the wrecking ball, every morning I wake up and I thought, oh my God, and I would be researching until 1 in the morning, saying, I gotta stop, I've gotta go to bed. But that's how I found out things that even the Burnett family didn't know. Leave no stone unturned. It felt frantic. Okay? So JDP is, now this is as of 2019, overseeing extensive and elaborate renovations. The current plan is for a boutique bed and breakfast. That's on hold. The house, the stone shop, and the carriage house have had significant structural work. The summer house was too rotted to restore, so JDP has had it rebuilt as a honeymoon cottage on the property. Okay? And now, here's the update. One of the, like I described the veranda, it had been taken off by some descendant. JDP had architects look at it, design and build and install a new veranda that looks exactly like the original one. All new windows. I mean, what is it like for one big window? Yeah. And the driveway was moved. Okay. So this is the gateway into the house. There wasn't a gate previously. Some people love it, some people not so much. But the main thing is the owner can do what he wants to do with the property. And 50 years from now, that house will still be here. And somebody else can follow their own dream of what they would like to do with the house. He also had built, so many details that he's added to this property. People say, you know, he's never going to make his money back. Well, of course, I mean, he spent millions and millions on this renovation. And I know from talking with him, that's not what he's interested in. He says he loves old houses, he loves antiques, he has a huge collection, and now he can play and create a place where all of his antiques can be. This fence goes the entire span of the property from Parkerville Road on the east to Deerfoot Road on the west. The whole fence only stopped cut by the entryway, the gate. And there was no sidewalk there. He had all his stonemasons come in and put pavers in place to create a sidewalk for the front. And rose bushes. I think there must be about 2 million rose bushes on the property. This is zoomed in from Main Street. It's the glimpse of a portion of the pond that he created that starts way over here and goes way over here, if you can see. And he liked the Monet water lily painting with a bridge going over a pond. So he wanted to try to recreate that. So behind that, in the main area of the pond, is the fountain you see, and there's a like a gazebo on the right, and then you can see the carriage house in the background. But so another thing he did was, if he's going to have a high-end boutique bed and breakfast, what if you lose power? So this building here, this windowless structure here, is the a power source with generators in it, so that the entire house can function if the power goes out. Okay. View from Deerfoot Road, meaning looking east, this is another view of the house. And on the back, meaning on the right-hand side, I think a solarium is still being constructed. And I heard a pool is going in somewhere. The restored carriage house required extensive shoring up. It is intended to serve as a small reception area for events. There's a small apartment above for a property manager. The door, for example, is one of his antique finds. He got it from a barn, very old barn in Providence, I believe. And in the lower level is an area for a bridal party to dress and prepare for a wedding. He still is saying that at this point, he does not plan to have it as a boutique bed and breakfast, but he's going to live there. But I just think, we'll see. He's put so much effort. Thank you.
It was very controversial.
Yes.
Very controversial.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. But you know how that works, and I'm not the best, I don't understand it, but the way I was able to describe it to people is you say, okay, suppose somebody's house is worth, correct me if I'm wrong, if the house is worth this much, if you put a preservation restriction on it, it lowers the value of the property. So say this down to this much. You have to pay him that much. So you're you're reimbursing him for the diminished value of his property. You're buying something. We're not giving him this money so he can buy grapes. We're buying a legal document that will continue with the deed, presumably forever, if there is such a thing. Yes?
I have to say a big thank you. For 30 years, I would drive my car to the Saab place downtown in Ellis, going by that house, and admired it. All the time I went by there, and I've seen the reconstruction of it. So I applaud all your effort, and I want to say thank you very much for what you've done, because I've always appreciated the architecture of that home. I also wondered, were you ever able to find out who originally constructed it? I have to ask that because 2 weeks ago, I toured the Marble House in Newport, and just the way those homes were constructed in the years they were, with manual labor, it's absolutely fantastic to see the craftsmanship. And that's what I also admired about that house, its location, the stonework, I mean, it was just beautiful.
Right, yeah. They were, I think they were Irish and Italian stonework.
Sounds right, okay.
Yeah, and like Cleary and names that are now common history in Southborough. Those people came, and one of the first things they came to build a house. And as I said, the first part of the house, it was kind of like your basic colonial house, but made of stone. with, you know, the front entrance here, two windows on either side, but bigger. But then it was 10 years later that it got greatly expanded with that tower, which is, yes.
So, when I listen to this story, the real story here, somehow you convinced the property owner who was going to tear it down to invest millions and millions of dollars to upgrade the facility. And I think that's the real story. I don't know how you did that. I had an opportunity to speak with him a couple of years ago because I was curious about his funding sources. And it intrigued me that it's all self-funded except for that preservation restriction. So
Right.
he's a wealthy man, and you convinced him somehow to save that property, and that's really
I don't know that, I certainly can't take credit for convincing him. I think that he was conflicted. I think he says that he had no idea that this developer was going to tear down the house. I don't know. But then he said that he changed his mind, and even though he was too far to commute to Edaville Railroad, and it was kind of a surprise when he said, okay, I'm going to keep it. But, and he did. But at that point, I probably said maybe, you know, had one conversation with him. But actually, I think what had the biggest impact on him was like the protest and the media coverage with this amazing group of teenagers who were out there 13 hours a day for a week. Just, who could resist? I mean, I wouldn't have had that impact. So I think it was a series of things, and it's such luck that he decided to and did. It was supposed to have been finished some time ago, but there are delays, and he's working away on it. I don't know, he doesn't know when it'll be finished. Now he's got supply chain issues with all the toilets for the house, so. Of which there are many.
Excuse me, one other question. Is that land and that house zoned for business, if he puts a business in there? Because most of it's residential from what I've seen, other than the schools.
Most of what is, of
The
that
land,
house,
right.
that specific land.
All the houses prior to going from Northboro to that house and all around is a lot of residential.
Right.
So do you know if that property is zoned for the potential business he's talking about?
Al, do you know the answer to that? Okay,
You don't know?
I don't think that it is zoned for business,
Okay.
but, and he wanted to have a cafe early on, but one of the neighbors, who was also a developer, started saying, well, that's going to be too much traffic on our street if you open it as a cafe on Saturdays, and got so many people against it that, and I remember saying to him, just give it 5 years and try it again, and I think that's what he was thinking. Yes?
Yes, first of all, I think that Jen and Bridget were real big heroes. I think they were fantastic. And,
Did you know them? Do you know?
I never knew them. I like what they're doing today, because I hope they're doing more great things, because they saved this house at the age of 15, 14 years
Right.
old. That's tremendous.
That's right.
Very few people can say at any time they're right. They did it when they were teenagers.
That's
When
right.
Those are people, and it's when you have young people doing it, I think that, my only suggestion, the only point I think, because he owns Edaville Railroad, for him to preserve Edaville Railroad and then sell this to developers, there's an amazing contradiction there. And I think he may have been afraid of the public backlash. That might have been a reason for it. He just woke up and said, wait, I can't do this, this is dumb.
It could be. He certainly didn't share that with me.
But yeah, he wanted, but I think he.
I think so, and I think the other developer that he was selling it to also did not like the backlash idea.
because their names, plus these young people, who they're gonna have to deal with the rest of their lives, are not gonna have a good feeling.
Right. Now, one of the girls, Jen or Bridget, said, well, if they have a wrecking ball, I'm gonna chain myself to a tree. And somebody said, do you have a chain? And she said, no, but I have a jump rope. They were just so excited and adorable. Yes, sir?
One question is, as part of the deal with the town, or was it, I mean, I'm just kind of curious, did the town in exchange for this major investment get any access, like an annual visitation right, or
That is
right
a,
to picnics, or anything? Because it seems like they spent $1 million for the ability to drive by and look at it behind the fence, which feels a little bit unfair that he would take all of that money and not offer something back to the town in
well, and
terms of access.
that certainly is a valid point, and it did come up a lot. And he thought maybe, this is in the category of we'll see, that I'm saying. He didn't want to make promises. I think I thought it would be great if there was a lunch place and we could sit on the veranda overlooking the reservoir, and he would have done that if the neighbor developer had not gotten that shot down. So, as it stands now, you're right, what we have is the opportunity to drive by that house. I don't care. I would love to be able to go in it, and maybe someday I've been in it a couple of times, but it's kind of like saving the environment to me, is that even if I don't benefit directly, there's more to it.
It's better than an Amazon warehouse.
What's that?
It's better than an Amazon warehouse. Is he still paying taxes, yearly taxes on that? Or is
Yes.
that negated?
I-
So the town is getting money back.
Right.
Because of.
Oh,
the-
absolutely, oh my gosh,
So
yeah.
eventually, maybe the million will get paid back in tax revenue. and
I
water
believe
use and
so.
everything.
I mean,
And did he implement redoing the whole road in front of there as well? Because that's just been redone,
no, that was part of another town project.
which benefits him, okay? So that's good.
Right.
One hand helps the other.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
Yeah, but
thank
he
you.
built that beautiful sidewalk and
Yeah.
that little
Yeah.
sitting area.
Right.
That was all.
Yeah, that was all his. And you know, you read the town blog and people say, oh, why did they put the clock there? Why didn't they put it over there? And, you know, people are just gonna gripe and complain about, people don't like the fence. They don't like the kind of trees he planted. Why didn't he plant these kind of trees? That's what I would have planted. So, yes?
How would people in Southborough not really knowledgeable of what all this man did for the town? I mean, like you said, he almost could have named the town, there was section of town after this man, for all the people he employed, all the work they did, the library, Fay, St. Mark's, all of this, so he's fun. How are people not knowledgeable?
That's a good question. I knew nothing.
I
He
grew up
doesn't-
in Southborough. I never knew anything about the Burnett part.
Right.
The Garfield family lived there.
Yep.
And I can remember the two little girls with the bangs and getting off the school bus.
Yeah,
And they had a pretty good-sized family, and I
Yeah.
think the girl's nanny or whatever lived there. The family kept her there until, she passed away, but I don't know what happened. I don't even know what happened, because the family was living in it. It was a beautifully kept up home, and I don't know what happened, but in
With
a
the
fairly
Garfield
short
or-
amount of time, the building fell into tremendous disrepair, tremendous.
so first of all, the Burnetts owned it and their descendants owned it until 1947. And at that time, it was bought by Irvin Garfield, who was the grandson of President Garfield. as, and that was one of the, yeah, and that was one of the things that people were saying, no, that wasn't that Garfield. And so somebody else did the research and even contacted a Garfield and said, oh yes, that was the grandson of the president who bought the house from the Burnett's. But then the descendants, and this woman, they called her Dorothea, I can't remember her name now, but she lived, this one old woman lived in that house for I don't know how many years, kind of basically in 2 rooms on the first floor, until finally it was just decided that, you know, she had to move on. And so I think the descendants, the Garfield descendants that I've spoken with were adamant that she had done everything she could to make sure the roof was in good repair. She'd spent a ton of money on a new roof not long ago, and so it depends on what you hear. This carriage house certainly was in disrepair, the structural part of it.
It's interesting because, and I have to say, I mean, I grew up in Southborough, I've lived in Southborough my whole life, and I was not thrilled about the idea of the $950,000 to a resident. But then on the flip side, I've always loved the house too. It's beautiful, it's a beautiful property. It's just, I mean, how many houses do you see like that? It's an amazing place. And a lot of discussion with the whole preservation thing was, you know, we could have bought the house for $450,000 because I think that's what he ended up paying for it, because the value kept dropping, because the thing was in bad repair and
Yeah, it
But
was a
then,
bad time
if
in
the
the
town
housing
had
market.
bought it, I mean, much like what's going on with White Cliffs, okay, great, the town bought it, now what the heck are you gonna do with it? You can't afford, a town cannot afford the kind of money where the current owner, it's like he's got lots of disposable income, he appreciates old things, he wants a place for his antiques. Who knows what's gonna finally end up, but the house is restored, it's beautiful again.
Right.
It's gonna be used either for his own personal or for
Right.
the weddings or whatever.
Yeah,
You know, and the town's financial obligation was known up front, and
right.
we get to enjoy the house.
And the fact that all of that money was part of the community preservation fund, we already had all that money. It was already there, and comes from, I think, a 1% surcharge, and it's for historic preservation. So it was being used exactly what the deal was. But yeah, if people who looked at it in terms of some of my tax money, the surcharge money, is going to this wealthy man, you can look at it that way, but there's so much more to the picture.
Yeah.
And this house now, presumably, who knows, I mean, it's going to be around for a long time, and will have numerous other lives, other uses. Maybe St. Mark's will acquire it at some point. I think it would be great because, as I said, there's no place in the town for the parents of the St. Mark's students. There's no place where they can stay. There's the Motel 6, $495, and
Probably isn't gonna do it.
and Robert Burnett, one of the other sons, converted the Southborough Arms to a much bigger hotel. Maybe you knew about that.
I remember when it burned.
Oh, gosh, yeah. And so for quite a while, that Southborough Arms was a perfect accommodation for the families visiting the students. And now there's nothing, so, you know, who knows? Yes and no.
The covenant to preserve the house, that passes on to any future owners?
Yes.
Mhm.
It's a legally binding document.
So that's something that any future owner will know
Yes,
in advance, it's a
Yes.
story.
yep, yep. Al?
Can I say something? I'm gonna come up there. First of all, don't go away because I hear, by the way, I'm deaf. You see this? It's a cochlear implant. And in a year, I may or may not be able to hear in this ear. And I have 12% word recognition in this ear, but I can hear Debbie. Because she speaks distinctly. This whole business of what's going to happen in the long run in the house, why isn't it a bed and breakfast, why is this and that? I think what happened first of all, in a nutshell, in the beginning, the deal was you get the $1 million from, what do you call it? From
CPA.
Yeah. Details to actually make that suitable for a bed and breakfast. There's an elevator in the mansion. He's like state of the art, all the plumbing, the electrical, everything. And, but I think what's happened is along the way, he decided maybe he didn't want a bed and breakfast. Well, there was no restriction that says he should. But here's the other thing. I took photographs for 5 or 6 years, almost every day. I took photographs of the whole process. And he went so far beyond what he had to do. I don't know how many millions he put into it. But with a chisel, they took every bit of water grout out of the stone mansion, out of that chapel, inside and out, and repointed it. And the detail is just amazing. So here's the point. It's a preservation restriction forever. So we're talking about, well, maybe we don't like the idea that now it looks like it's going to be a private residence. But like, that's only now. So that place is going to last for hundreds of years. And who knows, it's already lived different lives. And it's going to live more different lives. So it is what it is. But it's in way better condition than when it was originally built. Yeah, so that's my point.
Can you imagine on that property? I mean, I can't even imagine the size of that house, all the new electrical and mechanical. I mean,
Right.
I can't. It's got to be some staggering things.
Right, it is, it's mind-boggling. And of course, no, he never will make up his money, but not what he's doing.
The chair for Dead Woods